fully autonomous all the way to station with no problems. But in the event of an emergency, we have to train the crew to be able to react to those emergencies in a safely and timely manner. So we make their job as hard as possible by adding as many problems as we can during the training sessions. Chris Ferguson was my hiring manager. He was the first person I talked to on this program when I got started. And so making sure both your friend, your manager, your astronauts representing your country, making sure that they're safe is very, extremely important to me.
Welcome, Jim.
Good morning.
Jim, one of the questions we've been asked is whether the mission elapsed time problem that crept into issue today during this deorbit landing phase. Tell us how the software has been tested in the past 2 days to confirm that this problem is not going to show itself again.
Sure. So the mission elapsed time has been updated. The flight control team, Richard Jones, they recognized that. We're able to command the vehicle to change its mission elapsed time, which then goes into all of the flight management computers. So all the computers are now in agreement with what the mission elapsed time should be, and all of the continuing automated flight features that use that time are going to follow it and have been successfully following it ever since.
That's great news. So I know that the software is really able to do a lot for Starliner and handles a lot of the mission events, but how does that interact with the team here in Mission Control?
The team in Mission Control is watching what the flight control system is going to tell the vehicle what to do. So there are parts of the spacecraft inside of the flight software that say, hey, this is where the vehicle needs to point, and this is where the vehicle is going to need to go to in the future in order to do things like deorbit or rendezvous and things of that nature. So the flight control team on the ground is looking at that data and maybe making updates to it should they be wanting to make any changes to the flight plan in the future. But the ground control team always knows where the vehicle is going to be pointed, where it's pointed now, and everything that it wants to do to remain on the flight plan as designed.
And Jim, you've been working this program for a while. Tell me about some of the things. How are you feeling with the way? I mean, just to see that Starliner's up in space and now it's getting ready to come home. What are some of the things going through your mind now?
You know, this next phase of flight is a very critical one. It's one that we actually train a lot of the crew for most extensively. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the spacecraft fly the automated reentry plan just as we designed. Because, you know, that's all we care about. The thing we care about the most is the safety of the crew. So seeing that the automated flight plan can go as expected is great. Because we are also training the flight crews to be able to take over should there ever be any issues if they need to.
And Jim, when you look at some of the other aspects of this flight, you know, the brilliant launch yesterday, and how tough was it for the team to execute some of those demonstrations that were performed? Was that a problem at all, or did the spacecraft really perform the way it was supposed to?
You know, once we have the spacecraft in a stable orbit, we've been able to perform the demos just like we planned, just at a slightly different orbit. So being able to test the propulsion systems, looking at the vision, the navigation system, being able to check out the star tracker, which is telling the vehicle where it is relative to the stars, relative to the sun. All of those things have been working just as planned. The flight control team has been able to follow the flight plan for each of the demos exactly as we wanted to do it. So all the systems have been working nominally since then and doing everything we need to do to check out the vehicle for crewed flight.
And I guess coming up will be another big demonstration with Starliner making its way back to Earth.
Exactly.
Can you walk us through some of the events that we'll be seeing over the course of the deorbit and landing?
Sure. So we're going to do a deorbit burn, which is going to take the Starliner at the altitude that it's at and lower the future altitude so it actually comes into the atmosphere. Where it comes into the atmosphere is a place called entry interface. Once the spacecraft enters the atmosphere, it is then going to start controlling itself by doing turns and firing its thrusters to keep the spacecraft coming down towards our preferred landing zone at White Sands. And so while the spacecraft is maneuvering, it can change how far left or right it's going to go. It can change how far or how close it's going to come down on the ground. And all those things that are going to be done by the automated flight system. Once we have come through the atmosphere and slowed ourselves down enough, we're actually going to fire some drogue parachutes to slow the vehicle down. From there, we'll pop out the heat shield, pull out the airbags, and then we'll pull out the main parachutes, come down on a nice soft landing in White Sands.
And Jim, we had the early difficulty with the mission elapsed timer, and it's really, all the teams have been working very hard since then, and of course, none of the past couple of days have been, the teams have been working the whole time. Give us a little bit more insight. We touched on this earlier, but give us a little bit more insight into what that evaluation process has been, and y'all are dealing with a lower orbit than expected, but it is still something that is manageable. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. So Starliner is designed to fly anywhere in low Earth orbit. So the fact that we're at a slightly lower than planned orbit does not mean the vehicle can't perform like a spacecraft that can fly automated and on its own. So the processes we've been going through work the exact same way as if we were at a slightly higher orbit. It's just that we have we go around the Earth a little bit faster because our altitude is a little bit lower. But the teams have been able to operate the spacecraft using the exact same commanding, the exact same plan for the order of things that they were going to do than they would have done for the normal mission profile.
And I guess it will have just a little bit shorter journey. Normally it takes about, 45 minutes for Starliner to get down after its deorbit burn, but it's a little closer to 30 this time?
That's correct. That just has to do with how long it takes from the deorbit burn for the altitude to slowly come down, because our trajectory is no longer a circular trajectory around the Earth. It's going to be coming down in a lower path.
And we can see from our monitors here in Mission Control that Starliner is going through the orientation steps ahead of this deorbit burn. It's coming up in just a few minutes. Jim, you're watching this. You're watching this closely. What are you thinking so far?
Everything's looking good right now. We've got the vehicle pointed where we need to do the deorbit burn. It looks like the flight control team is all happy. GNC, my background from school, I'm happy now because that's the type of thing that I really studied for. So we're looking good for the deorbit burn.
We're hearing here in Mission Control that Starliner is on its way into burn attitude now. So that'll be getting us in place for the deorbit burn coming up just 7 minutes and 30 seconds from now.
And at this point, Starliner is crossing below Australia on its way over the Pacific. It is going to fly back on what is called an ascending node, which basically means it's coming up from south to north on this pass, going over Baja California and then over New Mexico on its way to White Sands. Part of the team here, of course, that's been working throughout this mission, the flight directors, they each have their own teams, and the on-orbit team is led by Bob Dempsey. Bob Dempsey is